According to Inner City, the following is the precise federal courtroom testimony from the Sean Diddy Combs trial, and it is provided only for educational and entertainment purposes. We strongly recommend viewer discretion before we start. The media had previously heard from Cassie Will Smith and others, so they didn't expect him to come in court. However, for a man who had built his career on perseverance, everything changed when Ice Cube walked into the courtroom, stood right in front of the system, which he now goes straight through after having tried to traverse it before. The Cube was there to testify, not to garner attention or publicity, and the documents and voice he brought with him paralyzed the courtroom with names, records, and connections. It was no longer just about Diddy, but about a covert system of manipulation, control, and exploitation that was backed by the same people we've been stories about Quincy Jones, Oprah Winfrey, Jamie Foxx, and others were told to glorify Ice Cube as the witness. It was supposed to be just another procedural day, but the cameras outside the courthouse were buzzing. As reporters hurried through documents and Diddy's legal team fixed their ties, the walls were quietly disintegrating around them. Then, without a press release or entourage, an Ice Cube entered through the open doors. The Cube with the manila folder and his eyes locked in front of him entered the room like a guy who has been waiting for this moment for years. And that's when the whispers started. The judge even reclined back in his chair as though he didn't even glance up at first. But when he did, the color went out of his face, and several jurors sat up straight. The judge nodded when I asked to speak because I wasn't called Cube. His voice had a solid quality to it. "Some of you didn't realize I'm not part of the club, and that's what," he said in his opening statement, sounding weighty and unrehearsed, like testimony that had been simmering beneath hip-hop's surface for 30 years. Annoyed them. The courtroom became silent as Cube spoke as a man who had survived the system and witnessed others suffer through it, rather than as an actor or rapper. And finally, he started with the club, which no one knows the name of, but everyone knows the gatekeepers, and insiders who run things behind the scenes and grin on camera. They don't want you there. He decided to pull off the cover for everything. "They like you," Cube added, "and they want you in so they can control you." He glanced at Diddy, who was now obviously worried, and that's when they began the rumors, the postponed meeting, and the terrible things. "I've seen it happen over and over," Cube continued, and the entire courtroom hung on every word. Neil was informed when good people, true artists, were brought in to give him a taste of the kingdom. He made it clear that he wasn't just at the club. He was running it, despite the fake uproar and the cries you don't even hear. They want you to sign the form, and if you don't, they'll make sure you don't work again. The judge asked him if he needed a break. Ice. "Are you curious as to why I am here?" Cube shook his head and replied, "The jury. I admire Jamie Foxx because they attempted to break a man." It started as usual, with the appearance of friendship, open invites, parties, and phone calls from people you never would have imagined. Every eye in the courtroom moved, and you could hear the reporters' pens halt. "First, it's flattery," the Cube went on. "Then it's favors, following that by control." He told the jurors that Jaime's growing brilliance, undeniable enthusiasm, and unequaled energy were your number. He let the silence be filled before Cube testified about the infamous basketball game. "They bring you in like family, and if you play along, they call you brilliant, but if you don't," Fox confided in him multiple times in a tactful, subtle manner out of fear. "Jamie played it cool, laughed it off," he added, referring to the parties. The no phones policy, the black SUVs, and the strange guests. "It wasn't just basketball," he claimed, adding that it was a test to determine who would comply, who would question, and who would defend. Stayed polite, but didn't give up entirely. And that's when the rumors started, claiming that he's too difficult, that his health is questionable, that he's not making headlines, but that he's showing up in the gossip blogs. Cube claims that the 2023 medical problem was a warning shot that was passed off as a punishment and complication rather than a coincidence. He asserted that Duty Circle installed cameras and archives in addition to hosting parties, footage of incidents you didn't know were being recorded. And once they had it, they kept it and used it. Cube informed the jury that James had once contacted him after a terrible event, stating that Fox was shaken, but he did not go into further detail. Proclaimed, "Cube, I can't talk about it, but I can't unsee it either." If the courtroom wasn't already stunned, they were now, since the next name Cub mentioned was Oprah. This wasn't just nonsense. This has layers. He claimed that when Jamie was at the top of her game, right after Ray and before the Oscar fervor, Oprah called her quietly and whispered, "You're blowing it." Cube described it without blinking, stating that James was surprised because he thought she was calling to congratulate him, but that she was actually phoning to redirect him. She advised him to collect his thoughts before revealing that she was going him to Quincy Jones' Cube, who told the judge that Quincy could be able to assist that individual. She took Jimmy to Quincy's house as if it were an intervention cube, but he told the jury that it wasn't healing but rather subjugation. He also said that everyone in Hollywood already knew who Quincy was, and that Quincy has long been a shadow figure who is praised on the outside but afraid behind the scenes. Jimmy referred to it as the most bizarre night of his life, stating that he felt as like he was being trained rather than helped. James would never go into detail about what happened at Quincy's house that night, but judging by the look in his eyes when he tried, Cube stepped in closer after stating, "That was enough." Quincy referred to it his legacy, and Oprah called it duty, but in actuality, they were giving him a leash. James started to change when we first met, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. He said to me, "Cube, the only way to stay alive in this game is to pretend," and I watched that man pretend for years. As he introduced the next name, Quincy Jones, the courtroom remained motionless. Not even a breath cube moved. Calmly, he said, "He's a godfather in this town, not simply a producer." The crystal of ice did not tremble. "This isn't gossip, it's the truth, and it needs to be on record," he said, casting a polite glance at the judge. He told the jurors that Quincy's name had been mumbled behind closed doors for decades, a name that was openly revered and secretly dreaded. Deal-making is necessary to become as powerful as Quincy, and I'm not referring to financial agreements. Rather, I'm referring to soul exchanges, which are only hinted at in cryptic interviews and songs. The kinds of agreements that just include power and lack commitments. According to his testimony, the meeting that Oprah arranged between Quincy and Jim Fox wasn't informal. Rather, it was a cube that indicated Jim was being handed. James believed that the meeting felt more like instruction than advice, despite Quincy's portrayal of it as mentorship. The room was very quiet from handler to handler. Processed, not help processed Cube told the jury that he had heard similar stories from other professionals who either vanished from the public eye and changed their public image overnight or had ECU, silent breakdowns, and went unnoticed. Using charm once more, Quincy sent the same message as duty: "Obey orders or we'll make sure you never work again." Then, claiming to have seen old private photographs, he disclosed something darker. Secretly distributed photos that weren't supposed to be there over the years, and each time Quincy was spotted smiling in the background but the subjects weren't, he told the judge that he couldn't confirm anything. He was able to demonstrate that this Quincy is more than just a mentor, even though we do not yet have the names of the individuals he reports to. He said, "I want to talk about how they keep you quiet. But it's not fear not, it's blackmail." He explained to the jury that his wealth was not the only source of his power, but also the films, videos, and secrets he had amassed over decades, from private flights, parties, studios, and hotel rooms. They record you at parties in addition to inviting you. To find out how many people have stayed silent throughout the years, and how many people are in possession of a flash drive, you can look at the prosecution. How many people have had calls from blocked numbers that play recordings of them performing an action they can't remember? Using the letter without a return address, he stated, "How many careers disappeared after they replied that Jamie Foxx wasn't the only one?" At one of Dodd's infamous events, he knew of at least 2 other artists who had been compromised. Cube, one of them, stated that he woke up in a hotel with a contract on the bed after going into a panic. "You weren't free once they had you," the Cube clarified. "You were theirs." That's why so many people publish images, chuckle in interviews, smile through it, and do red. On his phone, he also had pictures that weren't there. Carpets pretend everything is fine because the archive will be made public if they don't. According to his testimony, Diddy utilizes his network of publicists, journalists, executives, and stylists to frighten people rather than doing it directly. Everywhere you look, you'll feel it. And when someone tries to pull away, the gossip, sites turn against you, old cases are reopened, old rumors are revived, and you become unstable and dangerous to deal with. According to Cube, Jamie was struck by same exact smear campaign soon after he started to remove himself. He unexpectedly found himself with health problems. Rumors circulated that he was losing it and untrustworthy. But in fact, he was letting go, and people don't like it when you run. He told me that only happened once when I visited one of them. Cube gazed out at the jury while adjusting the microphone. Since his voice was a little shaky, it was as though the truth was sucking the oxygen out of the courtroom, making it somehow colder. He got a covert invitation in the early 2000s that included a name, time, and a car waiting outside his hotel. It wasn't a press release or party poster. As they typically refer to it, they said it was a networking event, and he reached a big. The gate shut behind him as he walked into Beverly Hills mansion. Phones were put away at the entrance. He observed the dim lighting, the lack of music, the atmosphere, the people whispering security at every turn, and, most importantly, that it wasn't a party. He said that after seeing celebrities in unlabeled chilled rooms with doors that split apart and some that produced strange noises behind them, he witnessed something that would stick in his memory. I saw the man I admired, slouched on a couch, with his eyes wide open, was the direct target of a camera. Cube claims that he turned around and left without saying goodbye or posing any inquiries. Nothing ever happened, he said, but he never came back because I recognized what it was. That wasn't a party. When he got a blocked number call in the car the next day that said, "We saw you leave." A trap cube aimed straight at Diddy and yelled, "You didn't just ruin lives, you filmed them first." Diddy's lawyer spoke aggressively into the courtroom, forcing the judge to stop as the reporters shook his ear, but since he wasn't being filmed, he fixed his jaw and looked straight ahead. The courtroom began to feel more like a confessional setting than a courtroom by the time Ice Cube reached this section of his evidence. James Fox told the jury, they didn't just try to silence him, they wanted to delete him. He also said that even Dylan's attorneys in Hollywood had given up arguing that Cube wasn't done, and that the damage had already been done. Although silence isn't sought, it is imposed behind the scenes once James left using pressure, patterns, and precise hits to make it seem as though someone has just vanished. Things started to happen during those parties. Rumors started to spread after Cube claimed that the roles for which he had received confirmation were no longer available. He was challenging, troublesome, and unreliable one moment, then a legend the next. Cube held the word for a moment. He generated a calendar with Himmy's 2019-2021 appointments and meetings after he said no. Before Cube pointed out a series of consecutive cancellations, the jury was baffled. It was no coincidence that he described how Himmy's Netflix projects were advertised and how the executives he was meant to write the screenplays for were directly connected to either Danny's satellite company or Bad Boy Revolt TV. His longtime collaborators stopped, replying, and then the health fear Cube came, leaving him suddenly ensnared under the law. After a long while of looking down, he continued, "You genuinely believe that was typical, that and very fit man like James simply faints during shooting, and it happens." Right after he starts discussing what he witnessed, Cube made a suggestion rather than an accusation, but the weight behind his, "I don't know what happened in that hospital," he added, "but I know fear and I know revenge." And that wasn't just a medical problem. It was a message cube that stated Jamie was being punished, not only because of his words, but also because he refused to be a tool, a mouthpiece, or a puppet. He asserted that James was offered multiple chances to rejoin the organization. They offered him jobs and atonement. He only had to smile. They tried to replace James after he refused to shake hands and act as if nothing had happened. This led to clone speculations and people starting to question whether James was still alive. They do just that, destroy you one by one until not even your supporters know the truth. They do this with a rubber, not out of fear, to keep their authority. You, the jurors, need to understand what Cube said. He leaned forward and looked around the courtroom, meeting the prosecution's gaze. They have power over your thoughts in addition to what you hear. This has nothing to do with music or even partying. According to the Cube, Hollywood, at least the club-run kind, is a system and mechanism designed to exploit rebellion and identity trauma as weapons, and then peddle them to the general population as entertainment. He paused before uttering the words that rocked the room. Every music they promote and every film they finance is scripted, even though it's all freedom and speech. The prison that is owned by the same individuals who promote jail music, before being silenced for being too political and starting to talk about who really runs the company, Tupac tried to raise awareness of a number of issues, as Cube explained. According to Cube's testimony, Diddy wasn't just a bad actor. He was a conduit, a face chosen specifically to make the very way of life that destroys people seem glamorous. No label support, no airtime, and no marketing money were available to those who did not follow this lifestyle. You talk about making, they too. Even said that singers who had spiritual or anti-industry opinions had their accounts blocked, their studios searched, and their hard drives corrupted. The club took no action. Diddy's gatherings, he said, were more than just lavish playgrounds. They were also vetting rooms where artists were tested on camera, and if you went along with it, you were protected. But if you went too far, you were either framed or disappeared. He mentioned a popular artist who refused to sign with Bad Boy after being asked to a party. She was disparaged as unstable and removed from her. You think she was just acting strangely because of the label and the fact that it was subtly written out of every award event. But as the Cube faced the jury once again, he said something that nobody else had the courage to utter throughout the trial, and you're all sitting here trying to asking how many people helped him do it, is just as important as figuring out what Diddy did. At that moment, the trial's focus changed from Diddy to the judge herself. When asked whether he wanted to make one final statement, Cube said yes. Then he stepped off the stand, walked to the center of the courtroom, and gave Diddy a direct stare. "You built a kingdom out of other people's silence," remarked the man. "It was slavery, but it was success." Diddy stayed a white, locked-eyed Cube and made no move. Instead of just hosting parties, you constructed psychological and emotional prisons and housed individuals who felt they were being... Who's at the door of that dream, holding the key? He asked himself, turning to face the gallery, the artists watching, the kids hoping to be singers or filmmakers who were being photographed while celebrating. "What do they expect from you before they'll let you in?" he asked, taking a deep breath. "For a time, I kept quiet because I thought it would protect me." Then he turned around. "I was bright-eyed in 1991, believing that I could change the game and make art without losing my spirit." And he pulled out a photo of myself from the folder he brought in. "It makes you a collaborator," he said, displaying the photo to the jury. Image, then slowly ripped it in two, destroying the surviving depiction of me. "But this, the individual who came here today, he doesn't fear any of you anymore." He went back to the platform where the folder before turning to look at the judge. "I don't know how you're going to manage this." But now that everyone knows, he had to face Diddy one last time. And you thought, nobody would point out that you have it all. The doors are now open but locked. He went past the gallery and down. Don't look at the reporters, the jury, and before to his departure, with a tiny head movement, he stated, They didn't kill me. They didn't kill James. All they did was turn up the volume." And with that, what he took with him when he left the courtroom, the echo behind would go on forever.